Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Dirshu Mishnah Berurah here. We're holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Hey. We'll be learning today in Yirtzeh Hashem Daf Kuf Mem Beis Amid Beis. We're holding in Siman Tov Kuf Yud Ches, and we begin today on the bottom of Kuf Mem Beis Amid Aleph. The last word really in my print. The last word on the page. We begin with Sif Zayin. Says the Mechaber. Now, you know what? Before I even read the Mechaber over here, we're going to go straight into the Mishnah Berurah. We're going to go to Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Lamed Daled, because the Mishnah Berurah and Ois Katan Lamed Daled really gives a little bit of a hakdama to this sif, and without it, it's going to be a little difficult to understand. So let's see the Mishnah Berurah right away. It says the Mishnah Berurah and Ois Katan Lamed Daled. Maschilin. Ha-Mechaber Kitzer Bozeh. The Mechaber wrote this halacha in a very, very brief manner. Ubeir ha'inyan kachu, and the proper explanation of this topic is as follows. Delaman de islay iser muktzah b'Yom Tov. According to the opinions that are machmir when it comes to muktzah on Yom Tov, that would be the shita of the Mechaber that we had earlier in Tav Tzadik Hey, where we're machmir on muktzah on Yom Tov even more than muktzah on Shabbos. And we explained back then that the reason for this would be the Chachamim they were afraid that on Yom Tov, where there are already heterim, because you're allowed to do malacha for Eichel Nefesh, if you're not going to be machmir when it comes to something like muktzah, people are going to treat Yom Tov in a very kuludik fashion. So you have the shitas that are machmir when it comes to muktzah on Yom Tov, and they hold that there are even certain things that might not be muktzah on Shabbos, but they're muktzah on Yom Tov. According to those shitas, ein maschilin lehishtamesh ba'oitzer b'Yom Tov. You would not be allowed to start using something that was put into storage before Yom Tov on Yom Tov, im lo yihizmin me erev Yom Tov, if you weren't making it for use on erev Yom Tov. And now the Mishnah Berurah explains, he gives a case of what we're speaking about. Kigoyin, for example, im hayaloi arema shel teven. Let's say somebody had a big pile of straw, of chaff. Sha'atzar sham lamaychel behemoisav. And he made this haystack. This haystack was made already before Yom Tov. And if somebody would have asked the farmer, what's this haystack for? Oh, that's for my animal fodder. I use that to feed my animals. So, if somebody had a haystack, sha'atzar sham lamaychel behemoisav, and it's in storage, so to speak, for the use as animal fodder, lehistabik mehem la'achar zman, and it's not for use now. That's my haystack that I'm going to use a month from now. Right now, I'm feeding the animals from this haystack. That's put away in storage. That's for later on. Oy shekanas eitzim la'oitzer. Or let's say somebody has a wood pile. Now, somebody might have more than one wood pile. He might have a wood pile very close to the house. That's the wood pile that he's using now every time he wants to light a fire. But then he has another wood pile that's all the way in the back in the yard, and that's la'oitzer. That's a wood pile that's, in storage. Lehistapik mehen limaysa chayrif. That's where I'm gathering wood for the winter. Right now I have wood over here that I use if I want to make a little fire in the fireplace, but that wood in the back, that's my storage. That's my winter firewood to fire up my wood-burning stove. In both of these cases, you have something that was put away in storage that wasn't intended for current use. In that case, according to those shitas that are machmer by muktzah, aser loy lehistapik mehen b'Yom Tov, you would not be allowed to use that straw or that wood on Yom Tov, bein lahasaka, whether you want to use the wood to make a fire, bein lahakil mehateven lebehemoisav, or if you want to take from the straw to feed your animal. Now, certainly, you're allowed to take straw on Yom Tov and you're allowed to feed your animals. And you're allowed to take firewood and make a fire, loichel nefesh, or for heat, or for something else. You're allowed to do these things on Yom Tov. But the problem over here is that you have a wood pile that you were mesiach das from. Your das wasn't on this wood pile to use it for Yom Tov. That wood pile is storage for the winter. That haystack, you didn't have das to use that haystack on Yom Tov. If you were mesiach das from it, that haystack was for 2 months from now. You're planning on using it later to feed your animals. And therefore, according to the Shitas that are machmer, on Muktzah and Yom Tov, you wouldn't be allowed to use these. That's the basic halacha. Now, the Mishnah Berurah continues, and he says, V'ka'amar ha'mechaber. And in this halacha here in Sif Zayin, what the mechaber is coming to tell you is, the lepa'amim, that there are some times that yesh lahater lahasaka, that we could be matir, this wood to use for burning, af dvarim shehichnisam la'oitzer, even though you put them into storage, or we would be able to be matir the haystack, even though you put it into storage. So the halacha, generally speaking, is that you are mesiach das from this wood and from this haystack, and therefore it would be aser. However, there are exceptions to the rule. And now the Mishnah Berurah explains. Kigayin, for example, teven shehichnisam la'oitzer. Let's say you made a haystack for storage. That's my haystack for 2 months from now. V'asam arema, and you made a nice big haystack. But then, you know what happened? V'niskalkalu. But the hay got ruined. What happened? Maybe it got rained on and it got moldy. Whatever it is, the hay got ruined. V'niskalkalu, it's ruined. And now she'enam ru'uyim ke'es l'maychel behema. And now it's not usable as animal fodder. The animals will not eat it. Then, says the Mishnah Berurah, mutter loy lahasik bahem. Now it becomes mutter to use as fuel. After metchila aktiyoi samidaitoi. Even though, as we explained, normally it's aser because you are mesiach das from that haystack. You intended that haystack for 2 months from now, not for current use. So you were mesiach das, and that's why normally we say it's muktzah. Nevertheless, says the Mishnah Berurah, mishash and iskalkalu, once the hay gets ruined, now it becomes fuel. When kolzman, it was usable as animal fodder, and you set it aside as animal fodder, so then it was animal fodder, and it's not available for use even as animal fodder now, because you set it aside as animal fodder for 2 months from now. So you were mesiach das from it. But now, if the hay got spoiled and the hay got ruined and it's not usable as animal fodder, so if it's not usable as animal fodder, what is it? It's straw, it's flammable material, it's fuel. If it's not usable as animal fodder, so then it's ready for hasaka. So then you're allowed to use it on Yom Tov, afilu b'li hazmana miba'od yom, even if you did not prepare it for Yom Tov use miba'od yom. So again, I want to, before we see the words of the Mechaber, I want to make sure we have this clear. First, we have the basic halacha. The basic halacha is that normally, according to those shitas that are machmer when it comes to muktzah, if you put something into storage, even though it's very usable, so you have a haystack, that haystack is very usable as animal fodder right now, but you didn't intend it for current use. You intended for use for next month. So then the halacha is, you are mesiach das from it, and now on Yom Tov, you cannot take from there to feed your animals. It's muktzah. Same thing, you had a wood pile, but this wood pile was set aside to be your wood for the winter. So it wasn't available for current use now. Even though it's very burnable, right? And you're allowed to make a fire on Yom Tov, still in all, that wood is muktzah. Why? Because you were mesiach das from that wood. And since you were mesiach das from it, it's muktzah, you're not allowed to use it. Says the Mishnah Berurah, the exception would be, for example, the case of the haystack. Let's say you had the haystack, but before Yom Tov, the hay got ruined. The hay got ruined. It's no longer animal fodder. Since it's no longer animal fodder, we're not going to say anymore that you are mesiach das from it because you intend to use it as animal fodder 2 months from now. No, you're not going to use it as animal fodder 2 months from now because it's no longer animal fodder. So if it's not animal fodder, what is it? It's hay, so it's fuel. Okay, if it's fuel, then you're allowed to use it on Yom Tov. Even though, like the Mishnah Berurah ends off, afilu b'li hazmana miba'od yom. So again, you had this haystack. This haystack, maybe you prepared this haystack around Shavuos time. I don't know. I don't know when you do these things, but you made the haystack in June. And in June, when you made the haystack, you intended this haystack to be animal fodder for your animals in December. And so now it comes Sukkos. If the hay is still animal fodder, You can't use it because you were Mesiach Das from it. You intended it for use in December, so you can't use it now. But if before Sukkot arrived, the hay became ruined and it's no longer animal fodder, now you want to use it to burn it on Sukkot, you could use it to burn it on Sukkot, even if you weren't making it before Sukkot. You didn't go outside before Sukkot and say, oh, it got ruined, now I'm making it for fuel. No, you don't have to be making it for fuel, because now the default position is that it's fuel and it's ready for use. You didn't set it aside for winter fuel. You didn't think about it as fuel at all. So, but even though you weren't making it, the default is that it's fuel. And if it's fuel, it's available for use now. Now, there's two things I want to draw your attention to. One is the Sharet Tzion's Katan Nun Hey. If you realize, I said that the hay had to become ruined before Yom Tov. What if the hay became ruined on Yom Tov? Let's say on the first day of Yom Tov, somehow the hay got ruined. Now it's the second day of Yom Tov, and you say, oh, I remember learning halacha that if the hay got ruined, I could use it as fuel. That the Chavetz Chaim says, no, it has to become ruined before Yom Tov. Because if it's ruined on Yom Tov, that means that at the outset of Yom Tov, Ben Hashmashis, on the first night of Yom Tov, it was Muktzah. So if it was Muktzah Ben Hashmashis, then it's Muktzah for the whole Yom Tov. So it has to become ruined on Yom Tov. I'm sorry, it has to become ruined before Yom Tov, not on Yom Tov. That's one thing. The second thing is I would draw your attention to Dirshu footnote number 43. It's a very nice footnote that gives a little bit the explanation that I just gave of this halacha. Says the footnote here, he brings down a Taisus from Beya Daf Lamed. Berurah halacha zu, Taisus explains this halacha, shekvar mitchilo keshehikze daitoi milishhtamish bahem. When you had this haystack and you heaped up this haystack and you said, this is going to be my animal fodder for November and December. You set it aside as animal fodder for November and December only if it's going to be animal fodder. You didn't intend it to be animal fodder if it gets ruined. But if it gets ruined, it gets spoiled, then I'm not Mesiach Das from it, that I wanted as fuel. The shiurim explains this, and he says, from the words of this Taisus, Nitan Lilmoid, we can learn an interesting concept in the Isser of Muktzah. We always say that Muktzah means something that's set aside. The opposite of Muktzah is Muchan, something that's prepared. The Kavet Shiurim says that based on this halacha, we could see that Muktzah is not pshat, that it's not Muchan. And the only way you could have something that's not Muktzah is if it's Muchan. No. The concept of Muktzah is that you were Mesiach Das from something. In our case over here, were you making this? No, you weren't making the Tevin. You set aside the Tevin for use in November and December. It happens to be that the Tevin got spoiled. But maybe you weren't even aware that the Tevin got spoiled. You certainly never went outside and said, okay, the Tevin is spoiled, so I'm making it for Yom Tov use. You weren't making it. The Mishnah Berurah said, Beferish, you don't have to be making it. So how did this Tevin become Muchan? It didn't become Muchan. So why is it Muktzah? The problem of Muktzah is that you were Mesiach Das. It's true I was Mesiach Das from this haystack. But why was I Mesiach Das from the haystack? Because I looked at this haystack, I made a beautiful haystack, and I said, look, beautiful animal fodder, this is my animal fodder for November and December. So yes, I was Mesiach Das from it. But I was only Mesiach Das from it because it was animal fodder. If it spoils, it's not animal fodder. Somebody will ask me, were you ever Mesiach Das from that fuel? No, I wasn't Mesiach Das from the fuel. If it's fuel, my Das is on all available fuel. I'm going to use whatever fuel I have to make a fire if I have to make a fire. Now it turns out I have more fuel than I thought I had. But I was only Mesiach Das from it if it was animal fodder. Okay. So now we saw the Mishnah Berurah and we saw this footnote. So we're a leg up on the Mechaber. Now let's see the halacha of the Mechaber inside. Says the Mechaber, last word on Kuf Mem Beis Amud Aleph, Siv Zayin. Maschilin ba'areimais hateven. You could begin to take straw to take hay from a haystack. So it's a brand new haystack. You never used it before. You could start taking hay from this haystack on Yom Tov. Imhu tivna sarya perish serucha. If it has become spoiled, ve'ispe kaitzim, and it has thorns in it. So because it's spoiled and because it has thorns, it's not usable as animal fodder. Why are you allowed to use it? Sha'aymed lahasaka, because now it's fuel. Now, the Mishnah Berurah, the Mechaber said over here, maschilin. The point of the word maschilin is you're allowed to start taking hay from this haystack on Yom Tov. The fact that this is the first time you're taking hay from the haystack makes it obvious that you were never making it. You see, if you already started using this haystack from before Yom Tov, so that's already hachama. Now, obviously, it's not muktzah. Obviously, you're using it as animal fodder. If you started feeding your animals from it 2 days before Yom Tov, now there's no shaila. Of course, you're allowed to feed your animals from it on Yom Tov. It's animal fodder. That's what it is. The chiddush over here is that you never started using it as animal fodder, but still it defaults into being animal fodder because it became ruined. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Eis Katan Lamed Hey. You're allowed to do this if it's tavna sarya, if it's spoiled. Says the Mishnah Berurah, let's say you just made a haystack in your field, and you didn't have any das that I'm making this haystack to use it as animal fodder 2 months from now. I didn't have in mind that I'm making an oitzer, that I'm putting this into storage. I just made a haystack. That kind of hay you're allowed to use as fuel, even if it's in perfectly good condition and it's ready to be animal fodder. Even if it's usable as animal fodder, or you want to use it for something else. You see over there, the teven never became muktzah. When you make a regular haystack in your field, why is it muktzah? It's usable as fuel. It's usable as animal fodder. You can fill a sack with it and make a mat. Well, that might be making a keli on Yom Tov. But it has all sorts of use, the teven. So it's not muktzah at all. So then you could use it for whatever you want, even if it's perfectly good condition. You don't have to set it aside for animal fodder. You could use it to burn also. The problem in our case is that over here you put it into an oitzer, and you made it into an oitzer, you made it muktzah. If it's spoiled, where we say that it's spoiled, we mean it's very spoiled. So it's not usable as animal fodder, even if you crumble it up. If it was still usable as animal fodder in any way, then it retains its status of being muktzah because it's set aside as animal fodder for 2 months from now. Because of the Taz writes, while it's true that if the hay spoils and it's no longer usable as animal fodder, now it defaults it to being fuel, and now you're allowed to use it as fuel, but there's still something you're not allowed to do. Usually when they burn hay, they don't just take pieces of hay and throw it into the fire. They braid a few pieces of hay together to make like a stick, and that's how they generally burn it. That you're not allowed to do on Yom Tov because that would constitute tikkun money. Now you're making a keli, so that you wouldn't be allowed to do. Only if it was already braided or tied up from before Yom Tov. Now this halacha only pertains if the hay is actually dry, so it's usable as fuel. But if the teven is wet, so then then you can't use it because it can't default into being fuel. It's not fuel. After chazi lehesik gado, even though we did see previously a halacha that wet wood or wet straw, while it's true that you can't use it for kindling, you can't use it as the primary fuel in your fire. If you have a roaring fire going, you could throw wet straw in. because the heat of the fire will quickly dry it out, and then it will be consumed and it will burn. But in this case over here, we wouldn't be matir the use of wet straw even to throw it into a hesed gadol. Why? Because since the status of this straw was that it was muktzah because it was an oitzer, and we're being mechadish that now, since it's spoiled and it's not usable as animal fodder, it defaults into fuel and it loses its status of muktzah. That's only true if it's usable as primary fuel. If you look at it, you say, yeah, that's fuel. But if it's wet, then you don't look at it and say that it's fuel, that it doesn't default into fuel. Eis Katan Lamed Zayin, the Mechaber said, Ve'ispe Kaitzim. The Mechaber gave two conditions over here. One is that the straw is spoiled, and the other one is that it also has thorns. And we need both of those ingredients to make it ice animal fodder and now to make it fuel. It says the Mishnah Berurah Katan Lamed Zayin, Ve'ispe Kaitzim. The Lavachi, if it doesn't have thorns, we have a new problem. Then it's usable for making bricks. Again, we have to realize the status of this hay was that it was muktzah, because you were machnis it to an oitzer. In order for it to default into animal fodder and now to be usable on Yom Tov as fuel or as animal fodder, it has to be that it no longer has a significant use for something that would retain its muktzah status. But over here, if it doesn't have thorns, you could use it for cement. You could use it to make bricks. And therefore, it doesn't necessarily default into a non-muktzah use. Veda, says the Mishnah Berurah, you should know, the kol zeh asif hu rak if hidas ha'mechaber la'el b'siman tav tzadikei siv daled. This whole halacha only pertains to the shita of the mechaber in tav tzadikei, the muktzah aser b'yom tov, who's machmer on muktzah on Yom Tov. Now, the classic case that we always give for the shita of the mechaber is bags of apples that you set aside for shiur. You have a grocery store, you tied up sacks of apples for intent to sell it in your grocery store after Yom Tov. It's muktzah on Yom Tov. If you have a hankering for an apple, you can't take an apple, according to the mechaber. Why? Because you are maktzit midaitoi. You set it aside for shiur, you will masiach das from it. The Ramah, who brings down the Shitu's Mekel, says, no, that's not muktzah. If you have a hankering for an apple, you can take an apple because it's royal achila. You could change your mind and you could take an apple. That's the classic case. So to over here, the reason this whole halacha starts is because according to the mechaber, if you are machdis to teven into an oitzer, if you made a haystack and you decided in your mind that it's an oitzer, it's a storage haystack for use 2 months from now, now it's muktzah and it's not available for use on Yom Tov. According to the Ramah, even though you are machdis at loitzer, it's still usable. You still could feed it to your animal, so it's not muktzah on Yom Tov. Avaladasa yesh matirin shehuva sham bahaga motol hestapik b'yom tov bein b'teven bein b'eitzim afiluch nisan loitzer v'ramah shelo yigia kan samach ad el. The reason the Ramah didn't comment over here, the reason we don't have a Hagah from the Ramah over here arguing in this halacha is because the Ramah is relying on you remembering what he was magia in Siman Tav Tzadikei. Okay, now we go to Sif Ches. You know, I'm very sorry, but I just realized that I started from Sif Zayin and I neglected to do Sif Hey and Sif Vav. We didn't do Sif Hey and Sif Vav yesterday. No, we didn't. So I hope you don't mind, but I'm going to go backwards now and I'm going to go back to Sif Hey. My mistake. I intended on doing more than one page today. All right, let's go back to Sif Hey. Says the mechaber, Kuf Mem Beis Amud Aleph Sif Hey. Lahaitzi graf shel rei ulahachziroi. Are you allowed to remove a graf shel rei, and are you allowed to bring it back into the house? Now, what's a graf shel rei? A graf shel rei would be translated as a chamber pot, a commode. You have a portable unit that is used for excrement. Now, obviously, that's something which is exceedingly ma'us, and it would be muktzah machmas mius. But not only would it be muktzah machmas mius, Many times, items that are muktzah machmas mias, while they're muktzah, you're not allowed to be metaltal them. You're allowed to be metaltal them l'tzarech b'kaimai, let's say, if you need, or l'tzarech gufay. If the chamber pot is in the way where it is and you need that place, you would be not the chamber pot. Something that's moas is in a place that you need, you would be allowed to move it. But a chamber pot is exceedingly moas. And since it's exceedingly moas, it's a very muktzah. And generally speaking, we would think that it's not even mutter and tiltal, even l'tzarech gufay or l'tzarech mekaymer. Now, over here, what the Mechaber tells us is, lahaitzi graf shel rei. If you have this chamber pot that you would think is muktzah machmas mias, but you want to remove it from the house because you have this disgusting odiferous item in the house and you want to get it out of here, ula hachziroi, and then you want to bring it back into the house because it may be needed for use again, says the Mechaber kedinoi b'Shabbos, the halacha that applies to a graf shel rei on Shabbos, kach dinoi b'Yom Tov, that's its halacha on Yom Tov. And in the parentheses, it says here, V'ayin le'el siman shin ches and sif lamed hey. Let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Katan Lamed, which isn't going to tell us a whole lot. Sif lamed hey, v'chein masha mavur sham be'inyan zeh b'sif lamed dalad b'sif lamed vav, gam kein shaykh be'inyanenu le'inyan Yom Tov. And it comes out that the halacha is that even though you would think, like I explained, that the graf shel rei is very muktzah, and there should be no heter for you to be metaltalit, the halacha is that mishum covered b'nei adam, you're not mechuyev to have something smelly in your house. You don't have to have a smelly chamber pot sitting in your house on Yom Tov or sitting in your house on Shabbos. So because of covered adam, you're allowed to remove the chamber pot from the house. Now, you want to bring the chamber pot back because it might be needed again. Over there in Hilchos Shabbos, we learned that the halacha is, yes, you could bring it back in, but in order to bring it back in, you have to take the chamber pot and, let's say, fill it with something usable, put in potable water or something else, so that we could say that you're being metaltalit agav what's in it. Okay, that's a very kurtz and sharf explanation of the halacha of graf shel rei. And the truth is that maybe tomorrow, if I can, I would like to go a little bit more into some practical applications of this halacha of graf shel rei as they apply to Yom Tov. Now we go to Sivav. Behema shemesa b'Yom Tov. Let's say you have a cow, and your cow died on Yom Tov. Now, a cow dies, it's an avela. It's usable to be fed to dogs. You could use it, you could feed the meat to animals. So behema shemesa b'Yom Tov, an animal died on Yom Tov, what's the status? Says the Mechaber, im hoisa misukenes me erev Yom Tov, if this animal was already very ill on erev Yom Tov, and you already foresaw the possibility that this animal might die on Yom Tov, then hareza mechat chalaklavim. Then on Yom Tov, you could cut it up and you could feed it to the dogs. Why? Because it was already muchan for use as dog feed. You already had in mind. You knew that it might die on Yom Tov, so you weren't mesiach das from it. But ve'im loy haisa b'sukenes, if it didn't look to you like it was in danger of dying, then afal pisha haisa chayla, even though maybe it was ill, hareze muktzah, it's muktzah because you were mesiach das from it. You didn't think it was going to be available to you as dog food before Yom Tov, so you were mesiach das from it. It's not usable as dog food. It's muktzah. And you're not allowed to move it. Says the Mishnah Berurah is Katan Lamed Aleph. Misukenes. If it was already in danger, then it's mutter because the Erev Yom Tov daite Allah, because already from Erev Yom Tov you had your mind on this animal that it may become dog food. It might be meat available for the dogs on Yom Tov, because it already was on its deathbed. So you expected that it might die. Excuse me. Then Ois Katan Lamed Beis, Hareza mechatcha. Then it is permissible for you to cut it up. However, it says the Chavetz Chaim, this heter that you have to cut it up, the dafka shekasha lehem lecha b'lichaticha. That's only if the dogs aren't going to be able to eat it if you don't cut it up. Hayecholim lechol kach. But if they're able to eat it the way it is without you cutting it up, leimetrachinan b'chdi. Then you're not allowed to do this terchi yisera on Yom Tov to go butcher up the meat to feed it to the dogs. We don't want you doing a terchi yisera on behalf of dogs on Yom Tov. But if they can't eat it without you butchering it up, then you can. If you didn't think the animal was going to die, then it's muktzah, and you're not allowed to move it. However, again, according to the Ramah, that's mekel by muktzah in Tav Tzadikei Siv Dalet, the muktzah shari b'Yom Tov, who holds that muktzah is mutter in many cases on Yom Tov, then I feel a Berurah shemesa gam ken shari. Then even an animal that was alive and well going into Yom Tov, if it dropped dead on Yom Tov of a heart attack, you could go ahead and you could cut it up and feed it to the dogs. Came because of a Magen Avram. That's what the Magen Avram writes. We already saw earlier the opinions that disagree with this. You see, the question over here is, are you going to say that according to the Ramah, who's mekel on muktzah, this animal, it's a live animal, you could shech the live animal on Yom Tov. A live animal has use on Yom Tov. So yes, it dropped dead now, so you want to use it as dog food. So it already had an available Yom Tov use, so you could use it as dog food too, even though you didn't expect it to die. According to the Mechaber is more machmer. The Mechaber would say, no, I didn't have an expectation that it was going to be usable as dog food on Yom Tov. It's like the sacks of apples again that I tied up for schera. I didn't have in mind to use it to make applesauce on Yom Tov. So it's not available to me. This animal, this live animal, yes, it's true I could have shechted it and eaten it on Yom Tov, but I certainly didn't expect it to drop dead and to use it as animal food. So then it's not available to be as animal food, according to the Mechaber. But the Mishnah Berurah brings down over here, however, that there is a shita that says, no, this would be also even according to the Mekilim. The Berurah, by an animal that was healthy, that there was no reason at all for you to think that it might drop dead, even the Ramah would agree that this remains muktzah. Why? Because this is like the extreme case of muktzah, of grois and smukin, where I took fruit and I put it up on my roof. I took grapes and I put it up on the roof to dry them as raisins. I was madche them biyadayim, because when you put them out to dry, first they become no longer roy la'achila before they become raisins. So I mamish put it into a state where it's not going to be edible. That means I was madchit biyadayim, not just I was mesiach das. I did a maisa to mamish make it muktzah. So too over here, by an animal that's healthy, it's so rachuk min adas, it's so unexpected that it should die and be available as use as dog food, that's such an extreme muktzah, even the Ramah would agree that it remains muktzah. The dafka b'is achayil is shari, and only if it was sick. The Ramah would be mekel in the case of where the animal was sick, but you still didn't expect it to die. It was a chayil, but it wasn't misukenes. In that case, the Ramah would be more mekel than the Mechaber. The Mechaber would say it's aser unless it was misukenes. The Ramah would say no, it was a chayla, it's already mutter. Okay, now so that covers Siv Hey and Siv Vav. Siv Zayin we did. Now we'll turn back to Kuf Ben Beis of Beis. I'm sorry for the confusion over here, and we'll go to Siv Ches. Says the Mechaber in Siv Ches. Noitlim eitzim. You can take wood, hasmuchim ledafne hasukah, that are next to the walls of a hut. The Mishnah Berurah says that sukkah over here doesn't necessarily mean sukkah shel mitzvah. It means a hut. You have a hut in your backyard, and you have wood that's somehow next to the walls of the hut. Or you could take them, umasikin b'hem, and you could use them to burn them. You're allowed to make a fire on Yom Tov. So if you need some additional fuel for your oven, you could take this wood that's next to the walls of the hut and you could burn it. And we don't say that it's a muktzah because somehow it became bottled to the hut and it became part of the walls of the hut. Let's see in the Mishnah. We're talking over here about a regular hut that's made to have a nice shady place to go in the backyard. The same halacha would apply to a sukkah shel mitzvah, but we're not talking specifically about a sukkah shel mitzvah because this halacha has nothing to do with hilchas sukkah. It has nothing to do with the fact that we're dealing with a sukkah shal mitzvah. So yes, this halacha would apply equally to a sukkah shal mitzvah, but it's not dafka talking about a sukkah shal mitzvah. The chamavur lekamon siman tafresh lamed chesef aleph b'hago. Oiskat lamed tes hasmuchim. So you have wood that's next to the walls of the hut. Explains the Chavetz Chaim. Ritzainer loymar. What the Mechaber wants to say over here is the eitzim shal sukkah atzman. Certainly, the wood that the hut itself is constructed out of. You have some kind of a hut outside, and it's got, beams. It's got some kind of slats that are part of the wall. Are you allowed to take that and use that as fuel on Yom Tov? Certainly not. The eitzim shel sukkah atzman, the wood that's mamish part of the structure of the hut, or something that forms the roof of the hut. You're certainly not allowed to take off a piece of the hut to use it as fuel in your fire to cook the food in your pot. So you have some kind of a gazebo outside, and you're barbecuing on Yom Tov, and your fire is going a little bit low, and you say, I need another piece of fuel. And you look over at your gazebo, and you have slats on the top of your gazebo, and you say, you know what, I could take off a couple of slats. I won't be missing them. I'll pull down a few slats and chuck them into the fire. No, that you certainly can't do. Mitam stiras binyan. That would be the malacha of stira. That's the malacha of tearing down a house. We have boina, and the opposite of boina is seiser. That would be the malacha of stira. You're not allowed to do that on Yom Tov, and that's not something that's mutter loichel nefesh. You're not allowed to do stira l'tzarech loichel nefesh. So that's certainly aser. So what's the Mechaber telling me over here is mutter? Varak kanim shesmachan svivais hadafanis. If you have reeds that were stacked up next to the walls of this hut, kevan shaloi ne'ergu im hadoifen, as long as they're not woven into the walls of the hut, as long as they're not formed into part of the structure, loy batli ligabe, they don't become bottled to the walls of the hut. It's not considered part of the structure, and therefore ve'ein behem mishum stira, and therefore there's no problem of the malacha of stira. Mishum muktzah gam loy nesru, and they're not muktzah. We're not going to say, oh, you were mesiach das from that wood. No, mishum muktzah gam loy nesru. Because your default position is that whatever's available to me as fuel, if I need fuel on Yom Tov, I'm going to use it. And this technically is available to you as fuel. Why not? You're not destroying your hut by using this, so it's wood and it's available as fuel. As long as we're not talking about something that was stuck into the ground. If it was stuck into the ground, you can't pull it out of the ground and burn it on Yom Tov, because there you would have a problem that you're making a hole in the ground, which already now you're going to start getting into Baina and Seiser and Chayrish. And the Paiskim explain the Kol Zeh Shaloi Hismech Akanim Kedei LaAbois Es Davnei Asukah Shiur Chazokim. Now I want to be clear, because I don't think I made it really clear enough. What is this wood that's stacked around the hut? It's not wood that just happens to be laying next to the hut. I don't need the Mechaber to tell me that if wood just happens to be laying next to a hut, I'm allowed to burn it. There would be no havamina if a 2x4 just happened to be laying on the ground next to a hut. I'm not going to have a havamina, oh, maybe it's bottled to the hut, and now I'm not allowed to use it as fuel for Yom Tov, because if I take it, it's seiser. It's like I'm breaking off a piece of the hut. The problem over here is we're talking about reeds that you actually stacked up alongside the walls of the hut. And that's why we have a havamina, maybe from the fact that you stacked them up alongside the walls of the hut, maybe they become bottled to the hut, and maybe it's usher to take from there and to burn it. And the Kamash Malon of the Mechaber is that, no, we don't say that as long as it's not attached to the hut. And that's why the Mishnah Berurah now continues and says, V'nisbar b'paiskim. However, the Paiskim do explain that Kol Zeh B'Shaloi Hismech Akanim Kedei LaAbois Es Davnei Asukah Shiur Chazokim. This halacha is only true if when you stacked up the reeds next to the walls of the hut, why did you do it? If you did it because you wanted to make the walls of the hut thicker, you wanted to somehow strengthen the walls of the hut, Maybe you wanted to make them more resistant to the wind. You didn't want the wind to be able to blow through the walls. So you wanted to make the walls nice and thick, and a way to do that was to stack reeds next to the walls. If that's why you did it, then that even though it's not connected to the wall, even if it could stand on its own, if you stacked it up because you wanted to use it to make the walls thicker, then it does become bottled to the walls of the hut, even if it's not woven into the walls of the hut, and then you wouldn't be allowed to use it on Yom Tov. Even if you put it there after the walls were already standing, it would be bottled to the doifen, and you would not be allowed to use it on Yom Tov. Okay, we're going to stop over here. I'm sorry for the little bit of confusion in the order of the shiur. It was my goof. I looked at it and I thought we were supposed to start from Siv Zion, but I'm glad that we got Siv Hey and Siv Vav in. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The schus of limud HaTorah should stand ganz Klal Yisrael in good stead. The Rebbe should send. I know that in Willowbrook there was a very, very sad tragedy today with the passing of Matas Weinstock. The Shama should have an aliyah. Klal Yisrael should have no more tzaras. The Rebbe should send a shefa of rachamim. The Rebbe should have rachmanis on Klal Yisrael. We should send a ruach, like we said in the last week's pasha. Vayaver. What's the lashon exactly? Vayaver. I think it says Vayaver Elikim. And you know what? If that's what it says, I want to be very careful because I want to say something about that. It says at the end of the Mabul, it says in Perek Ches, Pasuk Aleph, in last week's parsha, Noach. Vayizkar Elikim es Noach, Hashem remembered Noach, ve'izkal achaya, ve'izkal behema, asher ita bateva, vayaver Elikim, ruach ala oretz. And the Rebbeinu Shalom brought a ruach, a spirit. Rashi says, ruach tanchumin v'hanocha, avra lefanov. It was a ruach of tanchumin, a ruach of consolation, v'hanocha, and calmness. The Rebbeinu Shalom sent this kind of ruach shel tanchumin. And what's interesting is, what does the pasuk say? Vayaver Elikim ruach ala oretz. We always say that Elikim is the shem shel din. The name of Hashem of Elikim connotes judgment. That's din. The shem Havaya is rachamim. But over here it says that the shem of din, Vayaver Elikim ruach ala oretz. The shame of din brought this ruach shel tanchumin on the world. How is that? I think that pshat is that, like we've seen before, that the koyach of tefillah could be mahapich, the din to rachamim. We have to be mispal to the Rebbeinu Shalom. The Rebbeinu Shalom Shetaka, we've been living through to a certain extent a lot of din. The Rebbeinu Shalom should be mahapich the midah of din to the midah of rachamim. He should be vayaver elikim ruach ala aretz. The Rebbeinu Shalom should bring a ruach shel tanchumin. All of this should go away, and it should be, we should go into a time period of smiles and happiness and simchas. It should be even more simchadik than it was before. We should have so much simcha that we forget the tsar. How could we have that? If the Rebbeinu Shalom brings the Gula Shlema, the Rebbeinu Shalom should bring the Gula Shlema so we could have emesa simcha. Be well.